She was locked in the stables during the Luna trials, until the Alpha King claimed her scent. Glen Wallace would be looking for her soon. Angelica knew this the way you know winter is coming, in your bones, in the sharp bite of the air that promises frost. He'd want to see her like this, chained in the forgotten stables during the Luna trials. Proof that she'd been properly punished for refusing him. The music from the Great Hall sounded different when you were paying for your defiance in silver and silence. Angelica pressed her spine against the rough wood and closed her eyes, trying to pretend the chains around her wrists didn't burn. Silver-laced. Of course. Her father's idea. Can't have her causing a scene during the most prestigious event of the century. Not after what she's already cost us. The Luna trials. Where unmated she-wolves from every pack in the 5 territories gathered to compete for the ultimate prize, becoming the Alpha King's chosen mate. And where, according to 6 weeks of breathless gossip, Alpha King Ronald Bradford would finally select his queen. Angelica's family had spent 3 months trying to contain the damage. "Do you understand what you've done?" her father had hissed the night she'd refused Glen Wallace's claiming. "He would have cleared our debts, restored our standing, elevated our entire bloodline, and you threw it back in his face like it meant nothing." It all started with her disturbing discovery. 4 visits to Glen's territory, and she'd noticed things. The way his household staff moved through the halls like ghosts, silent and trembling. The Omega servant with bruises shaped like fingerprints on her throat who wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. The whispered names of his previous intended mates, Sierra and Lydia, who'd allegedly broken their betrothals and vanished before the bonding ceremonies. Angelica had gone to the pack registry that night, found both names, found the gaps in their records. Disappearances that no one seemed willing to investigate because Glen Wallace was wealthy, politically connected, and devastatingly charming when he wanted to be. When she'd refused him at the pre-trials banquet, citing fundamental incompatibility, his smile hadn't wavered. But his eyes had gone cold as winter stone. "I see," he'd said, his voice soft as silk and twice as dangerous. "How unfortunate." The next day, he'd called in her family's debts. All of them. Her father had 3 choices: hand Angelica over to Glen as an apology, face financial ruin and lose their ancestral lands, or find a middle ground that would satisfy Glen's wounded pride without destroying Angelica completely. The stables were the middle ground. Public enough that word would spread: Angelica Cooper, chained like an animal during the Luna trials, punished for her transgression. Private enough that she wouldn't actually be seen by anyone important. A humiliation that demonstrated proper consequences for an ungrateful Omega who didn't know her place. Angelica told herself it was better than the alternative. The silver biting into her wrists was bearable compared to a lifetime shackle to a man who made women disappear. Her younger sister, Mira, had cried when they'd locked her in. "This isn't right, Angel. You did the brave thing. You tried to warn them." "It doesn't matter," Angelica had said quietly, her voice steady even as her hands shook. "Just go to the trials. Someone in this family should have a chance at happiness." A burst of applause erupted from the hall, followed by a swell of strings and horns. The opening ceremony. The Alpha King had arrived. Suddenly, the stable door creaked. Angelica went still, her breath catching in her throat. Too early. No one was supposed to check on her until. But the footsteps weren't her father's. Too heavy. Too measured. Too powerful. And then she smelled it. Something that made every hair on her body stand on end, every nerve ending ignite like lightning had struck her chest. Her wolf surged beneath her skin, desperate and yearning in a way she'd never felt before. The silver chains burned hotter as her wolf pushed against them, whining in her mind. "Mate," something ancient whispered in her blood. "Mate, mate, mate." No. That was impossible. The footsteps stopped just outside her stall. She could see his shadow through the wooden slats, tall, broad-shouldered, utterly still. waiting. I know you're in there, a voice said, low and rough as gravel, edged with barely controlled fury. I can smell your fear. She should stay quiet. She should hide. She should. I'm not afraid, Angelica heard herself say, shocked by how steady her voice sounded despite the tremor in her hands. Liar. The stall door swung open. Angelica's first coherent thought was, too much. He was too tall, too broad, took up too much space in the cramped stable. Dark hair touched with silver at the temples, pulled back from a face that looked carved from granite and shadow, all sharp angles and harder edges. Eyes like molten gold, ancient and knowing. He wore ceremonial regalia, black and silver embroidered with the Bradford crest. The unmistakable mark of royalty. Her second thought, beautiful. Beautiful in the way a storm is beautiful, in the way you can't look away from something that might destroy you. What is this? He asked, his voice dropping to something dangerously soft as his eyes fixed on her wrists, on the silver chains, on the way her skin had gone raw and blistered where the metal touched flesh. Angelica lifted her chin, meeting his gaze even as the mate bond pulled at her like a fishhook in her chest. What does it look like? It looks, he said, taking a step closer, and the temperature in the stable seemed to drop 10 degrees, like someone has made a grave mistake. The mate bond pulled at her, insistent and undeniable. Her wolf was throwing itself against her ribcage, desperate to get closer to him. She could feel her body responding, pulse quickening, skin flushing, every sense suddenly awake in a way that felt like being struck by lightning. She dug her nails into her palms, the pain grounding her. You need to leave. His golden eyes snapped to hers, sharp and assessing. For a long moment, he just looked at her, carefully, like he was cataloging every detail. The thin dress that was all they'd left her in. The way she was folded on the stable floor, knees tucked beneath her, chains forcing her into submission. The defiance blazing in her face despite it all. No, he said finally, his voice absolute. I really don't think I do. He moved then, crossing the space between them in 2 strides. Angelica's wolf surged, half excitement, half panic. She pressed back against the post, chains rattling. Don't touch me. He stopped immediately, as if she'd struck him. Something like hurt flickered across his face before he controlled it. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully measured. I'm going to remove those chains. You can cooperate, or you can fight me, but either way, they're coming off. You don't have the right. I'm the Alpha King. His jaw clenched, a muscle ticking beneath his skin. I have every right. But more importantly. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was rough with barely leashed emotion. You're my mate, and someone has put silver on you. So yes, Angelica, I'm going to touch you. Hearing her name in his mouth did something to her, made her wolf whimper, made her want to lean into him, which was insane. How do you know my name? I know everything about you. He knelt in front of her, bringing them to eye level. This close, she could see the gold flecks in his eyes weren't just gold, they were alive, burning like embers. Could smell cedarwood and winter rain and something underneath that made her want to bury her face in his neck and never let go. The moment your scent hit me in the Great Hall, I had people finding out who you were, why you weren't inside competing. He gestured sharply at the chains, fury bleeding into his carefully controlled tone. And who was responsible for this? I'm responsible, Angelica said quickly, the lie bitter on her tongue. I refused an Alpha's claiming. This is my punishment. Pack law. His expression went very, very still. Dangerously still. Pack law, he repeated softly, and somehow the quiet made it more terrifying than if he'd shouted. Which Alpha? It doesn't matter. It does to me. Why? The word came out sharper than she intended, edged with all her fear and anger. Because you caught my scent and now I'm supposed to be yours? I didn't ask for this. I don't want. She stopped. His hand had moved to the chain at her left wrist, hovering just above it. And even though he wasn't touching her skin, just the proximity of him, the heat radiating from his body, made her breath stutter in her chest. I know, he said quietly, and the gentleness in his voice nearly undid her. I know you didn't ask for this. Neither did I. His fingers found the lock on the silver manacle, producing a thin piece of metal from somewhere inside his coat. But we can discuss what we want and don't want after you're not actively being burned by silver. Can we agree on that much? Angelica wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him that she'd rather stay chained than be rescued by another alpha who thought he had rights to her, who would cage her in a different way. But the silver really did burn. And her wrists were bleeding. And she was so tired of being in pain. Fine, she whispered. Something in his shoulders relaxed, just slightly. He went to work on the manacle, his hands steady and sure. Careful, so careful, not to touch her skin. It should have been awkward, the silence between them, this stranger kneeling at her feet in a darkened stable. Instead, it felt dense with everything they weren't saying. Everything the mate bond was screaming between them. The left manacle clicked open. He moved to the right one without a word, his jaw still tight, that muscle still ticking. Like he was holding back a storm. What's your name? Angelica asked. She knew, of course, everyone in the 5 territories knew the Alpha King's name. But she wanted to hear him say it. Wanted to hear how it sounded in that rough, careful voice. Ronald Bradford. He didn't look up from the lock, but something in his tone softened. But you can call me Ronald. We're past formalities, I think. The second manacle came free. Angelica's hands dropped into her lap, and she bit back a gasp as blood rushed back into her wrists, as the absence of silver sent pins and needles racing through her veins. Ronald made a low sound in his chest, almost a growl, and caught her hands before she could pull them away, cradling them in his much larger ones. Let me see. They're fine. They're blistered and bleeding. His thumb hovered over the worst of the burns, not quite touching, his control absolute. This is going to scar. I've had worse. His golden eyes flicked up to hers, sharp and searching. Have you? Angelica felt suddenly exposed in a way that had nothing to do with her thin dress or the fact that he was kneeling between her legs. Like he could see past all her defenses, past all the armor she'd built, straight to the scared, angry parts she kept hidden from the world. The Alpha you refused, Ronald said, still holding her ruined wrists with that devastating gentleness. Glenn Wallace. Angelica's stomach dropped like a stone. How did you? I told you. I know everything. His expression was unreadable, but something in his sense shifted. Went hot and dangerous, like the air before lightning strikes. He's here tonight. At the trials. And he's going to answer for this. No. Angelica tried to pull her hands back. He didn't let her, didn't tighten his grip, but didn't release her either. Just held her steady. No, you can't. If you confront him, he'll call in the rest of my family's debts. We'll lose everything. My father, my sister, they'll be ruined. They chained you in a stable. To protect me. The words burst out of her, sharper than she meant, raw with all the tangled emotions of the past 3 months. Glenn wanted me handed over like property. My father said no. This was the compromise. It's humiliating, yes, but it's better than being Glenn's mate. It's better than disappearing like the others. Ronald went very, very still. Others? Angelica's mouth snapped shut. She'd said too much. But Ronald's grip on her wrists tightened, not painful, but firm. Insistent. His golden eyes burned into hers. What others, Angelica? Chapter 1, the king who broke chains. Angelica wanted to lie. She should protect her family from whatever was about to happen, from the storm she could see building behind Ronald Bradford's golden eyes. But the way he was looking at her, like her answer mattered more than pack politics or debts or consequences, made something crack open in her chest. His mates, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Two that I could find records of. Both Omegas. Both vanished within months of their betrothals. The official stories are that they broke the arrangements, that they were released from their obligations. But I talked to people in his territory. I saw, she swallowed hard, the memories bitter. I saw how his staff acted around him. Like they were always one word away from punishment. So when he proposed the claiming, I refused. And he made sure I paid for it. Ronald's expression didn't change, but something in his sense shifted violently. Went from controlled fury to something primal and deadly, like the air before a storm breaks wide open. And your family punished you for rejecting him. They didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. He released her wrists carefully, like they were something precious, something sacred. Then he stood, unfolding to his full height, and the temperature in the stable seemed to drop. You made yours. They made theirs. Now I'm going to make mine. Panic spiked through her like ice water. Ronald, please, if you go after Glenn, if you make this public. I'm not going after him. He shrugged out of his formal jacket, the heavy fabric embroidered with silver thread and the Bradford crest, and held it out to her. Not yet. First, I'm taking you to the trials. Angelica stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. You're joking. He waited, jacket extended, his expression absolutely serious. When she didn't move, he sighed, and somehow that simple sound held exhaustion and frustration and something that might have been tenderness. Angelica, you're my mate. In 5 minutes, every unmated alpha in that hall is going to catch your scent on me and realize I found you. If I go back alone, it raises questions I don't want to answer. If I go back with you, dressed, cleaned up, clearly under my protection, it sends a very different message. That I'm yours. That you're safe, he corrected, his voice softening. Then, quieter, I know you don't trust me. I know every instinct you have is screaming that I'm just another alpha who wants to own you. But right now, Glenn Wallace thinks he's won. He thinks he's broken you, proven that you're just another disobedient Omega who needed to be disciplined. His jaw clenched. I would very much like to prove him wrong. Will you let me do that? Angelica looked at the jacket. At Ronald's face, all hard edges and brutal angles except for his eyes, which held something that looked almost like pleading. Her wolf was howling at her to say yes, to trust him, to lean into the mate bond that was pulling at her like a tide trying to drag her under. Every alpha she'd ever known had taken. Demanded. Claimed. This one was asking. She took the jacket. The fabric was still warm from his body, smelled like cedarwood and winter rain and power. She pulled it on, and it fell to her knees like a dress, swallowing her smaller frame. The weight of it felt like armor. Ronald's eyes darkened as he watched her, something possessive and reverent flickering across his face before he controlled it. Better, he said roughly. Then he moved closer, slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he reached out and fastened the top clasp at her throat with careful fingers. There. His knuckles brushed her collarbone, and the contact sent electricity racing through her veins. The mate bond flared hot and insistent between them. What do you want, Angelica? He asked quietly, his hand falling away even though she could feel the effort it cost him. Not what your family wants. Not what Glenn wants. Not what anyone expects. What do you want? No one had ever asked her that before. Not once in her entire life. The question lodged in her throat like broken glass. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. I want, her voice cracked. I want to not be afraid anymore. I want to make my own choices. I want to matter as more than just a debt to be paid or a prize to be won. Then that's what you'll have. He said it like a vow, like a promise written in blood. I swear to you, Angelica Cooper, you will never be a prisoner again. Not to Glenn Wallace. Not to your family. He paused, his golden eyes burning into hers. Not even to me. You're the Alpha King. You could just. I could, he agreed. I could invoke sovereign right and claim you here and now. I could force the bond, drag you to the trials as my chosen mate, and no one would question it. Pack law would be on my side. His expression went fierce. But I won't. Because what I want doesn't matter if you're not choosing it freely. Angelica's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This couldn't be real. Alphas didn't think like this, didn't offer choice when they could simply take. Why? The word came out broken, desperate. Why does my choice matter to you? You don't even know me. Ronald's hand came up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped her face with a gentleness that made her eyes burn. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, catching a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Because you're my mate, he said simply. And I would rather spend eternity wanting you than one day owning you. The words hit her like a physical blow, like something fundamental shifting in the universe. She searched his face for lies, for manipulation, for the trap she knew had to be there. She found nothing but raw, devastating honesty. Okay, she whispered, her voice shaking. Take me to the trials. Chapter 2, The Trial Interrupted. The great hall fell silent the moment Ronald stepped through the doors with Angelica in his arms. He'd insisted on carrying her despite her protests, and now she understood why. This wasn't just about her injured wrists or her weakness from hours in the stables. This was theater. This was a statement being written in real time across the faces of every wolf in the room. The Alpha King had found his mate. And she was wearing his jacket like a claim. Angelica kept her chin up even as hundreds of eyes tracked their progress across the polished marble floor. She could feel the weight of their stares, hear the sharp intake of breath from the Luna Trials participants in their elaborate gowns and glittering jewelry. Beautiful, polished she-wolves who'd spent months preparing for this moment, only to watch it slip away in the arms of a girl who smelled like hay and silver burns. Your Majesty, someone gasped. Lady Cordova, if Angelica remembered correctly, an Alpha's daughter from the Western Territories, draped in emerald silk. What, who is? Clear the way to the healer's wing, Ronald said, his voice cutting through the rising murmur of whispers like a blade. He didn't slow his stride, didn't pause to explain. Just kept walking with Angelica held carefully against his chest, one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back. She could feel his heartbeat through the thin fabric of her dress. Steady. Controlled. Absolutely unwavering. The crowd parted like water. They made it halfway across the hall before a familiar voice rang out, smooth as honey and twice as poisonous. Your Majesty, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Glenn Wallace stepped into their path, resplendent in formal attire, his blonde hair perfectly styled, his smile perfectly pleasant. But Angelica could see the calculation in his blue eyes, the rage simmering just beneath his polished surface. Ronald stopped. Slowly, deliberately, he set Angelica on her feet, but kept one arm around her waist, holding her steady. Holding her close. Glenn Wallace. Ronald's voice was pleasant, conversational, and somehow that made it more terrifying. I don't believe we've been introduced. An honor, Your Majesty. Glenn bowed, the picture of deference. Then his eyes cut to Angelica, and something cold slithered down her spine. Though I must point out, the young woman you're holding is my intended. There seems to be some confusion. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Angelica felt Ronald's fingers flex against her waist, felt the barely leashed violence in the tension of his body. "You're intended," Ronald repeated softly. "Interesting. Because she refused your claiming 3 months ago." A misunderstanding born of youthful uncertainty. Glenn's smile never wavered. "Her family and I have an arrangement. You see, the Cooper pack owes my family a substantial debt, one that was to be settled through our union. It's all very standard, very proper. I'm sure you understand the importance of honoring such obligations." He was good, Angelica had to admit. Made it sound reasonable, made it sound like she was the one being difficult. Made it sound like pack law and tradition were on his side. Ronald was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was very, very quiet. "Let me make sure I understand. You're claiming that because her family owes you money, Angelica Cooper belongs to you?" "Not belongs, Your Majesty. Though the debt does create certain expectations. Her family agreed to the arrangement. She wore my courtship gift. The betrothal was announced publicly." Glenn's expression shifted to something that might have been concern if Angelica didn't know better. "I understand she's been through an ordeal tonight, some necessary discipline for her defiance, but I assure you, once she's recovered, we'll proceed with the bonding as planned." The hall had gone deathly quiet. Everyone watching, waiting to see how the Alpha King would respond to such a direct challenge disguised as propriety. Angelica felt her heart hammering, felt the mate bond pulling tight between her and Ronald like a string about to snap. This was it, the moment where he'd either back down to avoid a political incident, or... "No," Ronald said simply. Glenn blinked. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I said no." Ronald's arm tightened around Angelica's waist, drawing her closer against his side. "Angelica Cooper is my fated mate. I recognized her scent the moment I entered this hall. Which means, according to the sovereign mate law that supersedes all pact debts and betrothals, she belongs to no one but herself, and if she chooses, to me." The whispers exploded into shocked conversation. Fated mates were rare, sacred. And the sovereign mate law was absolute, written into pact legislation centuries ago specifically to prevent political marriages from interfering with true mate bonds. Glenn's smile finally cracked. "That's quite a claim, Your Majesty. Though I wonder, how convenient that you discovered this bond tonight, just as she was being properly disciplined for her defiance. Some might question the timing." It was a bold move, questioning the Alpha King's word. "Dangerous." Ronald smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Are you suggesting I'm lying about my mate bond, Glenn Wallace?" The temperature in the hall dropped 10 degrees. Several wolves near the front of the crowd took an instinctive step back. Glenn's throat worked, but he held his ground. "Of course not, Your Majesty. I merely point out that debts don't disappear simply because of a bond. The Cooper family still owes my pack a substantial sum. If Angelica won't honor her part of the arrangement, then her family will face the consequences. Tradition demands." "How much?" Glenn stopped mid-sentence. "I'm sorry?" "The debt. How much does the Cooper family owe you?" 73,000 sovereigns, Your Majesty, plus interest accrued over. Consider it paid." Ronald's voice was absolute, final. "My treasurer will transfer the full amount to your accounts by morning. The debt is settled. The arrangement is void. Angelica Cooper owes you nothing." The hall erupted. Angelica's knees nearly buckled. 73,000 sovereigns. That was a fortune, enough to buy estates, to fund wars. And Ronald had just dismissed it like it was nothing, like her freedom was worth any price. Glenn's face had gone white, then red. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, this sets a dangerous precedent. If wolves can simply refuse their obligations because... This conversation is over." Ronald's voice cut through Glenn's protest like a knife. My mate needs medical attention. You're in my way. It wasn't a request. For a moment, Angelica thought Glenn might actually be stupid enough to press the issue. She could see the fury in his eyes, the wounded pride, the desire to push back against this public humiliation. Then he must have seen something in Ronald's face, some promise of violence barely contained, because he stepped aside. Of course, Your Majesty. His voice was tight, controlled. I hope you'll both be very happy together. The words were poisoned honey, but Ronald didn't acknowledge them. He simply swept past with Angelica still tucked against his side, leaving Glenn standing alone in the middle of the hall while hundreds of wolves watched his defeat. As they reached the doors to the healer's wing, Angelica finally found her voice. You didn't have to do that. 73,000. Was worth every sovereign if it means you're free of him. Ronald looked down at her, his golden eyes fierce. You're my mate, Angelica. And I take care of what's mine. Chapter 3, The Proposal. The healer's chamber was blessedly quiet after the chaos of the great hall. Soft lamplight, the scent of medicinal herbs, and silence, blessed, heavy silence that Angelica hadn't realized she desperately needed until this moment. The healer, an older woman named Margot with silver hair and knowing eyes, took one look at Angelica's wrists and made a sound of pure disapproval in the back of her throat. Silver burns, she said flatly, shooting Ronald a look that somehow managed to be both respectful and accusatory. These will scar, Your Majesty. I'm aware. Ronald's voice was tight, controlled. He stood against the far wall, arms crossed, watching as Margot settled Angelica onto the examination table. Can you help her? Of course I can help her. The question is why I need to in the first place. Margot began laying out salves and bandages with practiced efficiency. Silver lace chains during a public event. Someone wanted to make a point. They did. Ronald's jaw clenched. And I've made mine. Margot hummed noncommittally and began cleaning Angelica's wounds. The salve stung at first, then went blessedly cool against the burns. Angelica bit her lip against the relief that wanted to escape as a sob. You're very brave, Margot said quietly, so low that maybe Ronald couldn't hear. Or very foolish. Time will tell which. Probably both, Angelica whispered back. When Margot finished wrapping the last bandage, she stepped back and surveyed her work. Keep them clean. Change the dressings twice daily. Come back in 3 days so I can check for infection. Then she looked between Angelica and Ronald, something almost like sympathy crossing her weathered face. I'll give you privacy to discuss, whatever needs discussing. The door closed softly behind her. Silence settled over the room like snow. Ronald hadn't moved from his position against the wall, but Angelica could feel the tension radiating off him, could feel the mate bond humming between them like a live wire. You should rest, he said finally. I can have a room prepared. Explain it to me. The words came out sharper than Angelica intended. The mate bond. What it means. What you expect from me now. Ronald's expression flickered, surprise, then something that might have been respect. He pushed off the wall and moved closer, but stopped a careful distance away. Giving her space. The mate bond is. He paused, seeming to search for words. It's a connection between wolves that goes beyond choice or logic. When true mates find each other, there's a recognition, scent, instinct, something soul deep that says, this one is mine. It's rare. Many wolves go their entire lives without finding their fated mate. But you found yours. Angelica's voice was flat. How convenient. Right when I was chained up and helpless. His eyes flashed. You think I orchestrated this? I think powerful men find ways to get what they want and call it fate. The words hung between them, sharp and dangerous. Angelica waited for his anger, for the mask to slip and reveal whatever lay beneath his careful control. Instead, Ronald laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You're not wrong. I've spent 12 years watching powerful men use every excuse imaginable to justify taking what they want. Duty. Tradition. The good of the pack." He met her eyes steadily. "But I'm not asking you to trust that I'm different. I'm asking you to let me prove it." "Prove it how?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. The cover was worn soft with age, the pages cream-colored and thick. He held it out to her. Angelica took it warily. "What is this?" "Questions. Things I want to know about you. Things you might want to know about me." He ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain. Almost vulnerable. "I spent the last hour in the hall writing them while my advisors tried to convince me to just claim you and be done with it." She opened the journal. The handwriting inside was neat, precise, surprisingly elegant for such a large man. Her eyes caught fragments. "What's your favorite season? What scares you most? If you could go anywhere in the world, where would you go? What do you dream about when you let yourself dream?" Simple questions. Personal questions. Nothing about pack politics or Omega submission or duty. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "The mate bond can be completed immediately. I could invoke it tonight. It's my right as your fated mate and as Alpha King. Pack law would support it." Ronald's voice was careful, measured. "But I won't. Because I don't want a mate who's bound to me out of obligation or fear or because she had no choice." "So what do you want?" 3 weeks. Stay here in the castle. I'll give you your own rooms, your own space. No expectations, no obligations beyond spending time with me. We'll talk. We'll answer these questions. We'll figure out if there's something here beyond biology and fate." He paused. "And at the end of 3 weeks, you choose. Bond or break. Your decision, Angelica. I'll abide by whatever you decide." It sounded too good to be true. Every instinct she'd honed over years of navigating dangerous men was screaming that this was a trap, that no alpha, especially not the Alpha King, would offer this kind of choice without expecting something in return. "And if I choose to break the bond?" she asked quietly. "What then?" Pain flickered across his face, quickly masked. "Then I'll help you establish yourself somewhere safe, somewhere Glenn Wallace and your family can never touch you. You'll have resources, protection, freedom. No consequences beyond." He stopped, his throat working. "Beyond losing you. Which I'll survive, somehow." Angelica stared at him, searching for the lie. The manipulation. The hidden clause that would trap her. She found only devastating sincerity. "This is insane," she whispered. "Probably." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "But I've been alone for 12 years, Angelica. I'm not going to waste my fated mate on force and resentment. I'd rather have 3 weeks of you choosing to know me than a lifetime of you wishing you could leave." The journal felt heavy in her hands. Heavy with possibility, with questions, with a future she'd never imagined could exist. 3 weeks, she said slowly. "And you won't expect anything physical? Nothing you don't want to give freely?" His voice was firm. "I'm not Glenn Wallace. I won't take what isn't offered." She looked at the journal again. At the careful handwriting. At the evidence that he'd spent time thinking about her, about who she was beyond just being his mate. No one had ever done that before. "Okay," she heard herself say. 3 weeks. The relief that flooded his face was almost painful to witness. "Okay." He cleared his throat, and some of his carefully control slipped back into place. "I'll show you to your rooms. You need rest, and food. When did you last eat?" This morning. His expression darkened. We'll fix that. Come on. He offered his hand. Angelica looked at it for a long moment, at the choice he was giving her, at the man who'd paid a fortune for her freedom and was now asking permission to touch her. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers carefully, mindful of her bandages, and warmth flooded through her at the contact. The mate bond hummed with contentment. First question, Ronald said as he led her toward the door. What's your favorite food? I want to make sure the kitchens know. Despite everything, despite the fear and uncertainty and the absolute insanity of the past few hours, Angelica felt herself smile. Honey cakes. With lavender. Honey cakes with lavender. He repeated it like a vow, like he was committing it to memory. Done. Chapter 4, The Garden of Questions. The gardens became their sanctuary. Every morning for the past week, Angelica had found Ronald waiting on the same stone bench beneath an ancient willow tree, the journal open in his hands, 2 cups of tea steaming on the small table beside him. Always the same ritual. Always the same patient smile when she arrived. Today was no different, except that Angelica no longer hesitated at the garden entrance. No longer questioned whether this was real or rehearsed her escape routes. She simply walked the familiar path through roses and morning glories until she reached him. Good morning, Ronald said, looking up from the journal. Sunlight filtered through the willow branches, catching in his dark hair, softening the hard edges of his face. He looked younger like this. Less like the Alpha King and more like just a man. Morning. Angelica settled onto the bench beside him, leaving only a few inches of space between them instead of the careful foot of distance she'd maintained that first day. Which question today? Question 17. He turned the journal so she could see his handwriting. If you could go anywhere in the world, anywhere at all, no restrictions, where would you go? Angelica wrapped her hands around the warm teacup, breathing in the scent of chamomile and honey. That's easy. The Moonstone Coast. The Moonstone Coast? Ronald's eyebrows rose. That's nearly 2,000 miles from here. What's there? I don't know. That's the point. She smiled, feeling something loosen in her chest. My mother used to tell me stories about it before she died. She said the water there is so clear you can see straight to the bottom, even in the deep parts. And at night, the waves glow blue with bioluminescence, like the ocean is full of stars. She paused, the old dream rising up. She promised we'd go together someday. We never did. Ronald was quiet for a moment, his golden eyes thoughtful. How old were you when she died? 12. The number still hurt, even after all these years. Fever took her in 3 days. One morning she was laughing and making breakfast, and 3 days later. Angelica stopped, swallowing hard. She felt Ronald's hand cover hers on the bench. Warm. Steady. Not demanding anything, just offering comfort. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Losing a parent that young, there's no preparing for it. You sound like you know from experience. Both of mine died when I was 15. His voice went distant, remembering. Territorial dispute that escalated into an ambush. My father was Alpha King, my mother his Luna. They were supposed to be negotiating peace. His jaw tightened. I inherited the crown covered in their blood. Angelica's breath caught. She'd known Ronald became king young, everyone knew that. But she'd never considered what it meant. 15 years old and suddenly responsible for 5 territories and thousands of wolves. That's why you hate pack politics, she said softly. Why you looked ready to murder half the nobles at the Luna trials. I don't hate politics. I hate what people are willing to sacrifice for power. He met her eyes. My parents died because someone wanted their territory more than they wanted peace. I've spent 18 years trying to build something better than that. Trying to make sure no other 15-year-old has to become king because adults couldn't stop being greedy. 18 years. Angelica did the math. You're 33. 34 next month. A smile flickered across his face. Why? Too old for you? I'm 26. You're not ancient. She felt herself smiling back. Though you do have some silver in your hair. Stress silver. Comes with the crown. He tugged at a strand near his temple self-consciously. Does it bother you? No. The answer came easily, honestly. I think it suits you. Makes you look distinguished instead of just terrifying. Just terrifying? He laughed, the sound rich and warm. Should I be offended? You literally threatened to murder Glenn Wallace in front of 300 people. Terrifying seems accurate. I didn't threaten to murder him. I offered him a private conversation. His expression went wicked. Completely different. Angelica laughed before she could stop herself, a real laugh, bright and unguarded. Ronald's eyes softened at the sound, something tender crossing his face. You should do that more often, he said. What? Laugh. You're beautiful when you're guarded, but when you laugh. He stopped, seeming to catch himself. Sorry. Too much. No. Angelica felt heat rising in her cheeks. It's just, no one's ever called me beautiful before. Not like they meant it. Then everyone you've known has been blind. Ronald's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was stating an obvious truth. Your turn. Ask me something. Angelica flipped through the journal, landed on a question that made her pulse quicken. Question 23. What scares you most? Ronald's expression went carefully neutral. That's not a fair question. You wrote it. I know. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Fine. Honestly? What scares me most is becoming my father. I thought you loved your father. I did. He was a good man, a strong alpha, everything a king should be. Ronald's voice went quiet. But he was also lonely. My mother was his fated mate, and when she died, part of him died too. He kept ruling, kept making decisions, kept being the Alpha King, but he was hollow. Going through the motions. He looked at Angelica directly. I spent 18 years terrified I'd never find my mate, that I'd end up ruling alone and empty just like him. And now? Now I'm terrified of something worse. His hand tightened over hers. That I found you, and you'll choose to leave anyway. That I'll spend the rest of my life knowing exactly what I'm missing. The vulnerability in his voice stole her breath. This wasn't the Alpha King speaking. This was just Ronald, lonely, afraid, hoping desperately that she might choose him. I'm scared too, Angelica whispered. That this is all manipulation. That in 3 weeks you'll reveal this was just a game to make me compliant. That I'll complete the bond and wake up in another cage. I can't promise you won't be afraid. Fear is reasonable after what you've survived. Ronald shifted closer, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. But I can promise you this, every day, I'll give you reasons to trust me. And every day, you can choose whether to believe them. No pressure. No expectations. Just, me, trying to be worthy of you. Angelica's throat tightened. You keep saying things like that. Like what? Like I'm something precious. Like my choice actually matters to you. Because you are. And it does. He said it simply, like there was no other possible truth. They sat in silence, hands intertwined, the morning sun warm on their faces. Somewhere nearby, birds sang. The scent of roses hung heavy in the air. The Moonstone Coast, Ronald said finally. After the 3 weeks, regardless of what you choose, I'll take you there. Keep your mother's promise. Angelica's eyes burned with sudden tears. Ronald. No obligations. Just a gift. Because you deserve to see the glowing waves. She looked at him, really looked at him. At the careful hope in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that said he was bracing for rejection, the gentle way he held her hand like she might break. And for the first time since the stables, Angelica let herself wonder, what if this was real? Chapter 5, Ghosts and Whispers. The whispers started on the 8th day. Angelica heard them in the castle hallways, saw them in the sidelong glances from servants and nobles alike. Nothing direct, nothing she could confront, just the slow poison of rumor spreading through the court like infection. Did you hear? The stable girl. Some say she dabbles in low magic, love potions, binding spells. How else would the Alpha King abandon the Luna trials for an Omega with nothing to offer? My cousin's friend saw her wrists. Silver burns, they say. Clearly being disciplined for something. What kind of Luna has to be chained? 3 weeks of courtship and she still hasn't accepted the bond. She's playing games with him, angling for a better deal. Manipulative, that's what she is. Angelica tried to ignore it. Tried to focus on her morning meetings with Ronald, on the careful foundation they were building. But the words burrowed under her skin like splinters, finding every insecurity she'd ever had about not being enough. She was in the library when her father found her. Marcus Cooper looked older than she remembered, grayer at the temples, new lines carved around his mouth. But his eyes were the same calculating assessment she'd known her whole life. Angelica. He didn't embrace her, didn't ask how she was healing. Just stood in the doorway like he was approaching a business negotiation. We need to talk. We really don't. She turned back to her book, but the words blurred on the page. The Alpha King settled our debts. Do you understand what that means for our family? He moved closer, his voice low and urgent. We've been invited to court functions, given access to trade routes we could never afford before. Your sister has received 3 courtship offers from respectable alphas. All because of your connection to Ronald Bradford. I'm glad Mira has options. Angelica kept her voice flat. She deserves happiness. And you deserve to secure it for her. Marcus's hand landed on her shoulder, heavy with expectation. Accept the bond, Angelica. Stop this foolish waiting game. Every day you delay, you risk him changing his mind. You risk losing everything we've gained. She shrugged off his hand, standing to face him. Is that all I am to you? A way to gain things? You're my daughter. And daughters have duties to their families. His expression hardened. I gave you to Glen Wallace to save us from ruin. The Alpha King saved you from that fate and gave us more than I ever dreamed. The least you can do is show gratitude by accepting his bond. The least I can do, Angelica repeated, something cold settling in her chest. Just like the least I could do was accept Glen's claiming. Just like the least I could do was sit quietly in those chains while you all attended the Luna trials. That was necessary. It was cruel. And if you can't see the difference between Ronald offering me choice and you offering me to Glen like cattle, then we have nothing more to discuss. She walked past him toward the door. He caught her arm. He's the Alpha King, Angelica. Men like that don't wait forever. They don't keep offering choice when they could simply take what they want. His voice dropped. Whatever game you think you're playing, it will end badly. Accept the bond before he loses patience. Angelica pulled free and left without answering. But his words followed her through the corridors, mixing with the whispers, feeding every doubt she'd been trying to suppress. She found Ronald in his study, bent over maps with his beta, a broad-shouldered man named Marcus Thorne who'd been watching Angelica with quiet approval since the night of the Luna trials. Both men looked up when she entered. Ronald's expression immediately shifted from business to concern. Angelica. What's wrong? My father was here. She closed the door behind her, leaning against it. Demanding I accept the bond immediately to secure the family's position. Ronald's jaw tightened, but Marcus spoke first. With respect, Your Majesty, maybe we should tell her. Tell me what? Angelica looked between them. Ronald and Marcus exchanged a glance. Then Ronald gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit. Please. The formality in his tone sent ice through her veins. She sat. We've been investigating Glenn Wallace, Ronald said carefully. Specifically, his previous two intended mates, Sierra Blackwood and Lydia Crane. The ones who disappeared. Angelica's hands clenched in her lap. Yes. Except they didn't just disappear. Marcus pulled out a folder, spread documents across the desk. There are no death certificates. No formal bond-breaking records. No relocation permits. Nothing. It's like they vanished into smoke. Which means? Though Angelica already knew. Had known in her bones when she'd refused Glenn 3 months ago. Which means they might still be alive, Ronald said quietly. Hidden somewhere. Kept somewhere. His golden eyes met hers. Angelica, if Glenn did to them what I think he did, what you suspected he did, then you weren't just refusing a claiming. You were escaping a predator. The room tilted slightly. Angelica gripped the arms of her chair. We have investigators searching his territory, Marcus continued. Quietly. Carefully. If the women are alive, we'll find them. But it's going to take time, and if Glenn suspects we're looking, he'll hide the evidence, Angelica finished. Or worse. Exactly. Ronald stood, moved around the desk to kneel in front of her chair. I need you to know, this investigation has nothing to do with our arrangement. Whether you choose to accept the bond or not, I'm finding out what happened to those women. This isn't about winning you. This is about justice. I know. And she did. Could feel the truth of it through the mate bond humming between them. What do you need from me? Nothing. Just. He paused. Be careful. Glenn's already spreading rumors about you, trying to undermine your credibility before any accusations can surface. If he discovers we're investigating him, he might escalate. Let him. Angelica felt something hardening in her chest, crystallizing into resolve. I've survived his worst already. I'm not afraid of rumors. But she was. God, she was terrified, of the whispers, of her family's pressure, of the possibility that Glenn's previous victims were still suffering while she sat safe in the castle. Ronald seemed to read it in her face. He took her bandaged hands carefully. 2 weeks left, he said quietly. And then you choose. But until then, I need you to trust that I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Not Glenn, not your family, not the whole damn court if they keep whispering poison. You can't control what people say. No. But I can make it very clear what happens to people who harass my mate. His voice went cold. I've been patient. I've been political. But there are limits to both. Marcus cleared his throat. Your Majesty, perhaps we should discuss the investigation parameters. Later. Ronald didn't look away from Angelica. Right now, I'm making sure my mate knows she's not alone. Angelica felt something crack open in her chest. This man, this powerful, terrifying, impossibly gentle man, kept choosing her. Kept protecting her. Kept offering her exactly what she needed before she even knew to ask for it. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me for basic decency. He squeezed her hands gently. Now, I believe we have question 28 to discuss. Something about childhood dreams? Ronald, you don't have to. I want to. His expression softened. The investigation will take weeks. Your family will keep pressuring you. The rumors will keep spreading. We can't control any of that. But we can control this, our time, our questions, our choice to keep building something real despite everything trying to tear it down. So they returned to the garden. To the questions. To the careful, precious normalcy they were creating together. But that night, alone in her rooms, Angelica couldn't stop thinking about Sierra Blackwood and Lydia Crane. Couldn't stop wondering where they were, what they'd endured, whether they were still hoping someone would come for them. And she couldn't stop thinking that if Ronald's investigators found them, when they found them, everything would change. The truth would come out. Glenn would be exposed. And she would have to face the fact that the man kneeling in a garden asking about her childhood dreams had quite possibly saved her life. Chapter 6, The First Mate Found. They found Sierra Blackwood on the 13th day. Angelica was in the gardens with Ronald, halfway through question 32 about what books had shaped her childhood, when Marcus appeared on the path. His expression was grim. Your Majesty. We found her. Ronald was on his feet instantly. Where? Northern Territories. Small pack settlement called Widow's Creek. She's been living under the name Sarah Moss, working as a seamstress. Marcus glanced at Angelica, something like apology in his eyes. She's fragile. We explained who we were, that she was safe, but she wouldn't speak. Just kept asking if he sent us. Bring her here, Ronald said immediately. Carefully. Make sure she knows she has a choice, that she can refuse. She's already on her way. Arrived an hour ago. Marcus shifted his weight. She's in the guest wing. The healers are with her, but she won't talk to anyone. Just sits there, staring. Angelica stood slowly, her heart hammering. I want to see her. Both men looked at her. Ronald's expression was carefully neutral, but she could feel his concern through the bond. Angelica, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She met his eyes. She's like me. An Omega who refused to be his victim. Maybe she'll talk to someone who understands. Ronald studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll come with you. No. The word came out more forcefully than she intended. No offense, but you're the Alpha King. You're exactly the kind of power that probably terrifies her right now. Let me try alone first. Omega to Omega. She could see him wanting to argue, wanting to protect her from whatever horror waited in that room. But he just said, all right. But I'll be right outside if you need me. The guest chamber was lovely, soft colors, gentle lighting, windows overlooking the rose gardens. But the woman sitting in the chair by the window looked like she belonged in a dungeon instead. Sierra Blackwood was thin, too thin, all sharp edges and hollow spaces. Dark hair hung limp around a face that might have been pretty once but was now just haunted. Her hands were folded in her lap, perfectly still, like she'd learned that stillness was safety. She didn't look up when Angelica entered. Sierra? Angelica kept her voice soft, non-threatening. My name is Angelica Cooper. I was hoping we could talk. No response. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. Angelica moved slowly to the other chair, sitting down carefully. Leaving space between them. Not crowding. I know you're scared, she said quietly. I know you probably don't trust anyone right now, especially not someone from the Alpha King's court. But I need you to know, Glenn Wallace tried to do to me what he did to you. I refused his claiming 3 months ago. My family chained me in the stables with silver as punishment during the Luna trials. Finally, Sierra's eyes moved. shifted to look at Angelica's bandaged wrists. He wanted to break me too, Angelica continued. Would have, if Ronald Bradford hadn't found me first. So I understand if you don't want to talk, if you just want to disappear again. But if there's anything at all, you want to say, I'll listen. And I'll believe you. Silence stretched between them. Angelica was about to give up, to leave Sierra to her silence, when the other woman spoke. You really refused him? Her voice was barely a whisper, rusty from disuse. Yes. And lived. Yes. Sierra's hands trembled in her lap. I tried to refuse. At first. Before the betrothal was finalized. My father said it was nerves, that all Omegas got nervous before a claiming. That Glenn was a good match, wealthy, respected. A bitter laugh escaped her. Respected. What happened? Angelica asked gently. The betrothal went forward. My father signed the contracts. And Glenn. Sierra closed her eyes. He was charming at first. Brought gifts, said sweet things. But there were moments, little flashes where I'd see something cold behind his eyes. Something that enjoyed my nervousness. After the ceremony, he took me to his estate. Showed me to my rooms, beautiful rooms, he said. Locked from the outside. Her voice went flat, emotionless. He said it was for my protection until I adjusted. That Omegas needed firm guidance. That I'd thank him eventually for teaching me my place. Angelica's stomach turned, but she kept her expression neutral. Kept listening. He visited every day. Asked questions, about my friends, my family, my fears. I thought he was trying to know me. Sierra's laugh was broken glass. He was cataloging my weaknesses. Every fear I shared became a weapon. Afraid of the dark? He'd leave me in pitch-black rooms for hours. Claustrophobic? Locked in closets. Mentioned missing my sister? He'd bring letters from her and burn them in front of me without letting me read them. For how long? 6 months. Maybe longer. Time stopped meaning anything. Sierra's hands clenched. I stopped eating. Stopped speaking. Stopped being a person. And when I was too broken to even cry anymore, when I became inconvenient instead of entertaining, he had me smuggled out in the middle of the night. One of his men drove me to Widow's Creek, gave me money and a new name, and said if I ever spoke about what happened, my family would pay for it. Every sibling, every cousin. He'd destroy them all. So you stayed silent. I stayed alive. Sierra finally looked at Angelica fully, and her eyes were old. Ancient. You were supposed to be next, weren't you? After Lydia. Lydia? Angelica's breath caught. The second mate. You know about her? I saw her. Once. Before I left. Sierra's voice dropped even lower. They kept us separated, didn't want us talking, planning. But I heard her screaming sometimes. In the West Wing. He kept her longer than he kept me. She fought harder. Horror crawled up Angelica's spine. Is she still there? I don't know. I've been too afraid to find out, too afraid that asking questions would lead him back to me. Sierra's hands were shaking violently now. But if she's still there, still in that place, God, I've been safe for 3 years while she... It's not your fault. Angelica reached out slowly, giving Sierra time to pull away. When she didn't, Angelica took her hand. You survived. That's not a crime. I should have done more. Should have gone to the authorities. He would have killed your family. You know he would have. Angelica squeezed her hand gently. But now you're here. Now you're safe. And now we can find Lydia. We can stop him from ever doing this again. Sierra's eyes filled with tears. You believe me. Just like that, no proof, no evidence, you just believe me. Because I know what he is. Because I saw the same calculation in his eyes, the same predator behind the charm. Angelica felt her own eyes burning. And because if Ronald Bradford hadn't caught my scent that night, I'd be exactly where you were. Locked away. Broken down. Erased. They sat together in silence, two women who'd survived the same monster, holding on to each other in the gentle light of the guest chamber. Finally, Sierra spoke again. The Alpha King. Ronald Bradford. Is he good to you? Angelica thought about morning tea in the garden. About questions written in careful handwriting. About a man who'd paid a fortune for her freedom and asked for nothing in return except the chance to know her. Yes, she said softly. He's good to me. Then you're luckier than you know. Sierra wiped her eyes. Most of us don't get that. Most of us get men like Glenn. Not anymore. Angelica stood, determination crystallizing into purpose. I'm going to make sure Glenn Wallace never hurts another woman. Will you help me? Will you testify to what he did? Sierra's face went pale. If I testify, if I speak publicly, Ronald will protect your family. I promise you. He'll station guards, relocate them if necessary, whatever it takes. Angelica held out her hand. You don't have to be silent anymore, Sierra. You don't have to carry this alone. For a long moment, Sierra just stared at Angelica's outstretched hand. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it. Okay, she whispered. Okay. I'll tell them everything. Chapter 7, The Truth Comes Forward. The state dinner was in full swing when the doors to the great hall burst open. Angelica was seated beside Ronald at the high table, enduring her first official court function since the Luna trials. 2 weeks had passed since Sierra's arrival, and while the investigation into Glenn continued quietly, publicly everything appeared normal. Nobles from all 5 territories filled the hall, celebrating some trade agreement Angelica couldn't bring herself to care about. She was picking at her second course when the crash echoed through the hall. Every head turned toward the entrance. A woman stood there, swaying on her feet, barely upright. Her dress, if it could be called that, was little more than rags. Her dark hair was matted with dirt and what might have been blood. But it was her face that made Angelica's breath catch. Malnourished. Scarred. Desperate. And absolutely furious. Which one of you is the Alpha King? Her voice cracked, raw from screaming or crying or both. Which one of you is Ronald Bradford? The hall erupted in shocked whispers. Guards moved toward her, but Ronald raised a hand, stopping them. I am. He stood slowly, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. I'm Ronald Bradford. The woman's knees nearly buckled with relief. She took a stumbling step forward, and Angelica could see now, her wrists were rubbed raw, her ankles scarred with what looked like restraint marks. She'd been chained. Recently. My name is Lydia Crane. Each word seemed to cost her. And I'm here to report a crime. Imprisonment. Torture. 3 years of, her voice broke. Glenn Wallace. He kept me locked in the west wing of his estate for 3 years. And I want him to pay. The whispers exploded into chaos. Nobles shouting questions, guards moving toward Lydia, people standing for a better view. But Angelica only had eyes for Ronald. His expression had gone absolutely cold. Not angry, beyond anger, into something elemental and terrifying. When he spoke, his voice cut through the noise like a blade. Silence. The hall went deathly quiet. Ronald descended from the high table and crossed to Lydia. She flinched when he approached, hands coming up defensively, but he stopped several feet away. Knelt. Making himself smaller, less threatening. Lydia Crane. You're safe now. No one here will harm you. His voice was gentle, at complete odds with the fury Angelica could feel radiating off him through the bond. Can you walk? Do you need medical attention? I need. Lydia's eyes swept the hall, landing on someone in the crowd. Her face twisted with rage and terror. He's here. Glenn Wallace is here. Every head turned. Glenn stood near the back of the hall, his face perfectly composed except for his eyes, wide, calculating, already planning his defense. He smiled, that same charming smile Angelica remembered, and spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. Your Majesty, this is clearly a disturbed woman. I've never. Marcus. Ronald didn't take his eyes off Lydia, but his voice cracked like a whip. Arrest Glenn Wallace. Charges of unlawful imprisonment, torture, and anything else this woman wants to add. You can't be serious. Glenn's smile faltered. Based on the word of some deranged. We found Sierra Blackwood 2 weeks ago. Ronald finally looked at Glenn, and whatever he saw in the Alpha King's face made Glenn go pale. She's currently under palace protection and has given a full statement about the 6 months you kept her prisoner. So unless you'd like to argue that 2 separate women are lying about the same pattern of abuse, I suggest you shut your mouth before I do it for you. Guards moved toward Glenn. He took a step back, his mask of composure cracking. This is outrageous. I have rights, I have. You have the right to remain silent while we investigate whether you're a predator or just a monster. Ronald's voice was ice. Take him to the dungeons. No visitors. No contact with anyone outside these walls until I say otherwise. Glenn's eyes cut to Angelica as the guard seized his arms. She met his gaze steadily, letting him see her lack of fear, her absolute conviction. You, he spat at her. This is your doing. You poisoned him against me. I survived you. Angelica stood, her voice carrying across the hall. That's all I did. Survive what you tried to do to me. The guards dragged Glenn toward the side exit. His protests echoed through the hall until the doors slammed shut, cutting him off mid-sentence. Silence fell again. Ronald turned back to Lydia, who'd collapsed to her knees, shaking. Someone get the head healer. Now. His voice was still gentle, still careful. Lydia, I'm going to have you taken to the medical wing. You'll be safe there, I promise. No one will touch you without your permission. Sierra, Lydia whispered. You said you found Sierra. Is she, did he? She's alive. She's here, in the palace. Safe. Ronald glanced at Angelica. Would you? I'll bring her. Angelica was already moving, already running from the hall toward Sierra's chambers. She burst through the door to find Sierra sitting by the window, staring at the gardens. Lydia's here, Angelica said breathlessly. She escaped. She's in the Great Hall and she's asking for you. Sierra's face crumpled. She's alive? Yes. Come on. They ran together through the corridors, Sierra's hand tight in Angelica's. When they reached the hall, Lydia was surrounded by healers, but her eyes were searching, desperate. Lydia. Sierra's voice broke. Lydia's head snapped up. Sierra? They collided in the center of the hall, 2 women who'd survived the same nightmare, holding each other like lifelines. Both of them crying, both of them shaking, both of them finally not alone. Angelica felt Ronald's hand find hers, warm and steady. The Luna trials are suspended, he announced to the hall. His voice was absolute, brooking no argument. All participants will be hosted as honored guests for as long as necessary, but there will be no more competition. This court has more important matters to address than my marriage prospects." Murmurs of shock rippled through the nobles, but no one dared protest. Ronald turned to Angelica, his expression softening. "Get them somewhere safe. Somewhere quiet. I'll handle the politics." She watched him over the next hour as he commanded the hall with brutal efficiency. Ordering a full investigation, sending guards to Glenn's estate, arranging protection for both women's families, shutting down every noble who tried to defend Glenn with cold, precise fury. This was Ronald Bradford as Alpha King. Not the gentleman who asked her about childhood dreams in the garden, but the ruler who'd spent 18 years building something better than the violence that killed his parents. Someone who wielded power like a scalpel, precisely, purposefully, in service of justice rather than ego. Angelica had been falling in love with the man in the garden. But watching him now, seeing him use every ounce of his authority to protect two women he'd never met, seeing him treat their trauma with the gravity it deserved, she realized she was falling in love with all of him. The gentle and the fierce. The patient and the furious. The man who'd given her choice, and the king who would burn down anyone who tried to take it away. Chapter 8, The Trial of Glenn Wallace. The trial took place in the Grand Council chamber, where pack law had been administered for 3 centuries. Angelica had never seen it so full. Representatives from all 5 territories packed the gallery, their faces ranging from horrified fascination to grim satisfaction. This wasn't just about Glenn Wallace anymore. This was about whether the old systems that enabled men like him would finally face consequences. Angelica sat in the front row beside Sierra and Lydia, their presence a united front. Ronald presided from the high bench, flanked by the 5 territorial alphas who would serve as jury. His expression was carved from stone, giving nothing away. Glenn sat in the defendant's box, still impeccably dressed, still composed. But there was something frantic behind his eyes now, the look of a predator realizing he'd been caught. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Helena Cross, called Sierra first. Sierra's voice shook as she took the oath, but once she began speaking, something steadied in her. She told them everything, the locked rooms, the systematic psychological torture, the way Glenn had weaponized every vulnerability she'd shared. Her testimony lasted an hour, precise and devastating. Glenn's defense attorney tried to discredit her. "Isn't it true, Miss Blackwood, that you willingly entered into a betrothal with my client? That you signed contracts?" "My father signed contracts," Sierra replied, her voice stronger now. "I was 18 and terrified and told that refusing would ruin my family. That's not willing. That's coercion." When Lydia took the stand, the chamber went deathly silent. She was steadier than Sierra, her 3 years of captivity having forged her fear into fury. She described the west wing of Glenn's estate in excruciating detail, the soundproofed walls, the locks on every door, the way he'd visited her daily to remind her that no one was coming, that she'd been forgotten. "He said I should be grateful," Lydia's voice was ice. "That he was teaching me what it meant to be a proper Omega. That breaking me was for my own good." "And you never tried to escape?" the defense attorney asked, skeptical. "I tried 17 times. Lydia met Glenn's eyes across the chamber. "He broke my ribs the 3rd time. Dislocated my shoulder the 7th. By the 17th attempt, I couldn't walk for a week. So yes, I stopped trying. Because I wanted to survive long enough for someone to find me." Helena Cross presented evidence next, financial records showing that both Sierra and Lydia's families had owed substantial debts to the Wallace pack. Medical records from Glenn's private physician detailing injuries consistent with torture. Testimony from servants who'd heard screaming but been too afraid to report it. The case was damning. Irrefutable. But then Helena called Angelica to the stand. Angelica's hands were shaking as she took the oath. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, could hear the whispers that had followed her for weeks now. The Omega who'd bewitched the king. The stable girl who didn't know her place. Let them whisper. Let them judge. She was done being silent. Miss Cooper, Helena began gently. Can you tell us about your interactions with the defendant? Angelica took a breath and began. She told them about the courtship, about noticing the fear in Glenn's household staff, about discovering the gaps in the records for Sierra and Lydia, about refusing the claiming despite her family's desperation. And what happened after you refused? Helena asked. He called in my family's debts. All of them. Gave my father 3 days to either hand me over as an apology or face complete financial ruin. And your family chose to punish me. Angelica's voice didn't shake. They chained me in the stables with silver during the Luna trials. A compromise, they called it. Public enough that word would spread about my discipline, private enough that I wouldn't embarrass them further. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Several nobles who'd whispered about her being unfit for the throne now looked uncomfortable. The chains were silver-laced, Angelica continued, holding up her wrists. The scars were still visible, pink and raised against her skin. They burned. For hours, I sat there burning while my family attended the ball. While Glenn Wallace watched, satisfied that I was being properly broken. But you weren't broken, were you? Helena's voice was soft. No. Angelica met Glenn's eyes. I was terrified. I was in pain. But I wasn't broken. Because I knew in my bones, that accepting him would destroy me more thoroughly than any silver chain ever could. The defense attorney stood for cross-examination. He was older, calculating, clearly expensive. Miss Cooper, isn't it true that you're currently involved in a intimate relationship with the Alpha King? We're fated mates, yes. How convenient. His smile was oily. You refuse my client's claiming, and weeks later, you're the Alpha King's chosen mate. Quite an upgrade, wouldn't you say? Angelica felt anger flare hot in her chest. The mate bond isn't something you choose or plan. It's biology. Fate. Or, the attorney suggested smoothly, an excellent story to justify rejecting a lawful betrothal arrangement. Tell me, Miss Cooper, did you have any proof of my client's supposed crimes when you refused him? Any evidence? I had my instincts. And my observations. So, no evidence. Just feelings and suspicions. He turned to the jury. This young woman refused a legal claiming based on nothing but feminine intuition, caused substantial financial harm to her own family, and now sits here trying to destroy my client's reputation to justify her own poor decisions. My decisions saved my life, Angelica said quietly. Or, the attorney pressed, your decisions were simply the machinations of an ambitious Omega who saw an opportunity to aim higher than a respectable Alpha like Glenn Wallace. Who saw the Luna trials as a chance to seduce the most powerful man in the 5 territories. The chamber erupted. Ronald's hand came down on the bench like a thunderclap. Counselor, you will show respect to my mate or you will be removed from these proceedings. My apologies, Your Majesty. The attorney didn't look apologetic. But the question stands. How do we know Miss Cooper's testimony isn't simply bias against a man who offered her a lawful claiming she found insufficient? Angelica stood slowly. Her heart was pounding, but her voice came out clear and strong. You want to know how I knew Glenn Wallace was dangerous? Fine. I'll tell you. She looked at the jury, at the packed gallery, at every face watching her. I saw the way his servants flinched when he moved too quickly. I saw bruises on an Omega who wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. I heard whispers about women who'd vanished. And when I asked questions, polite, careful questions, he looked at me with eyes that promised punishment. She turned to Glenn. You thought you could break me like you broke Sierra. Like you broke Lydia. You thought chains and fear and family pressure would make me compliant. But you miscalculated. Because I wasn't refusing you because I wanted something better. I was refusing you because I wanted to survive. The chamber was absolutely silent. So no, Angelica continued, her voice ringing clear. I don't have proof from 3 months ago. I have proof now, 2 women who lived through your torture. I have scars on my wrists from my own family's attempt to deliver me to you. And I have the certainty that if Ronald Bradford hadn't found me that night, I'd be in a locked room in your estate right now. Victim number 3. She sat down, her whole body shaking with adrenaline. Helena Cross stood. The prosecution rests, Your Honor. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, the head juror, Alpha Morrison from the Eastern Territories, stood with an expression of barely contained disgust. On the charge of unlawful imprisonment, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of torture, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to harm, guilty. He looked at Glenn with open contempt. This court recommends the maximum sentence permitted under PAC law. Glenn's composure finally shattered. This is insane. I have rights. I have. You have the right to spend the rest of your life in prison. Ronald's voice cut through his protests like ice. Where you will never touch another woman, never manipulate another family, never use your wealth or position to destroy innocent lives. He leaned forward. Take him away. As guards dragged Glenn from the chamber, screaming protests and threats, Angelica felt something fundamental shift inside her. The shame she'd carried, about refusing him, about the chains, about not being enough, transformed. Alchemized into something else entirely. Strength. Pride. The absolute certainty that she'd done the right thing, even when it cost her everything. She'd spoken her truth. And the world had listened. Chapter 9, Choosing Every Day. The morning of the 21st day dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through Angelica's windows like a benediction. She stood before the mirror, studying her reflection. The scared girl who'd been chained in the stables 3 weeks ago was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who'd testified before the 5 territories and watched justice finally, be served. Glenn Wallace had been sentenced to life imprisonment. His family's holdings were being redistributed to his victims and their families. Sierra and Lydia were both receiving compensation, protection, and the therapy they'd need to heal from years of trauma. And Angelica's 3-week courtship period had ended. Today, she had to choose. She found Ronald in the garden, their garden, sitting on the stone bench beneath the willow tree. But this time there was no journal, no tea waiting. Just him, hands clasped between his knees, staring at the roses like they held answers to questions he didn't want to ask. He looked up when she approached, and something vulnerable flickered across his face before he controlled it. Good morning, he said quietly. Morning. Angelica sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. The mate bond hummed between them, warm and insistent as always. No questions today. We've gone through all 47 of them. Some of them twice. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I figured it was time to stop asking and start listening. They sat in silence for a moment, watching butterflies drift between the blooms. Somewhere nearby, birds sang their morning chorus, oblivious to the weight of the decision hanging in the air. 3 weeks, Ronald said finally. I promised you 3 weeks to decide. And I promised to abide by whatever choice you made. He turned to face her fully, his golden eyes steady despite the fear she could feel through the bond. So. Angelica Cooper. What's your answer? Angelica looked at him, really looked at him. At the man who'd broken her chains with his bare hands. Who'd paid a fortune for her freedom and asked for nothing in return. Who'd written 47 questions about her childhood and dreams and fears because he wanted to know her, not just possess her. She thought about the past 3 weeks. The conversations that had stretched for hours. The way he'd made her laugh when she'd forgotten how. The careful way he'd held her hand, always giving her space to pull away. The fury in his eyes when he'd arrested Glenn, and the gentleness in his voice when he'd comforted Sierra and Lydia. She thought about standing in that courtroom, speaking her truth, and knowing that Ronald would protect her no matter what she said. "I'm terrified," she said honestly. "Every instinct I've developed tells me this is too good to be true. That you'll change once the bond is complete. That I'll wake up and realize I've traded one cage for another." Ronald's expression didn't change, but she felt his pain through the bond like a physical thing. "But," she continued, her voice strengthening, "I'm done letting fear make my decisions. I'm done letting trauma tell me what I deserve." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Ronald Bradford, I choose you. I choose us. I choose this bond." The joy that flooded his face was almost painful to witness. "Angelica." "But," she interrupted, squeezing his hand. "I need something from you first." His expression shifted to concern. "Anything. Whatever you need. Ask me again tomorrow." Ronald blinked. "What?" "Ask me again tomorrow if I'll accept the bond. And the day after that. And every day for the rest of our lives." Angelica felt tears burning in her eyes. "Because I don't want this to be a one-time claiming. I don't want to wake up 10 years from now and wonder if we're still choosing each other or just going through the motions. I want it to always be a choice. Every single day." Understanding dawned in his eyes, soft and wondering. "You want me to court you? Forever. I want us to choose each other. Forever." She touched his face, feeling the scratch of stubble under her palm. "I want you to ask for my heart every morning. And I want to give it to you freely, not because some bond demands it, but because I love you. You love me." He said it like he was tasting the words, like they were precious and fragile. "I love you," she confirmed. "The man in the garden who asks about my favorite seasons. And the king who burns down systems that hurt people. All of you." Ronald pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. She could feel him shaking, could feel the depth of his emotion through the bond, relief and joy and love so overwhelming it made her chest ache. "I'll ask you every day," he murmured against her temple. "Every morning for the rest of our lives. Will you accept my bond, Angelica Cooper? Will you choose me again today?" "Yes." She pulled back to look at him. "Now and every day after?" "Yes." The bonding ceremony took place that evening in the same garden where they'd spent 3 weeks learning each other. No grand spectacle, no political theater. Just Angelica and Ronald, Sierra and Lydia as witnesses, and the territorial alphas to make it official. Ronald wore simple formal attire, black and silver. Angelica wore a dress she'd chosen herself, deep blue like twilight, the color of possibility. No veil. No symbols of submission. Just her, standing before him as an equal. The ceremony itself was ancient, the words unchanged for centuries. But when Ronald spoke his vows, he added something new. "I, Ronald Bradford, Alpha King of the 5 territories, claim you as my mate, my partner, my equal. I vow to choose you every day. To ask for your heart every morning and treasure it when you give it freely. To never cage you, never diminish you, never make you less than what you are." His voice was steady, absolute. "I choose you, Angelica. Today and every day after." Angelica's vows were simpler. "I, Angelica Cooper, accept this bond. I choose you, Ronald Bradford. Today and tomorrow and every day we're given. I vow to give you my heart freely, to build something with you that's stronger than fate or duty or fear. I choose you." When their hands joined, the mate bond flared between them, complete now, fully formed. Angelica felt it settle into place like the final piece of a puzzle she hadn't known was incomplete. She could feel Ronald in every cell of her body, could sense his emotions as clearly as her own. Love. Devotion. Absolute certainty. And underneath it all, the promise he'd keep every day for the rest of their lives, the choice to love her, over and over again. The witnesses applauded. Sierra and Lydia were crying happy tears. But Angelica only had eyes for Ronald, for the man who'd given her back her voice and then asked what she wanted to say. So, he murmured, pulling her close as the ceremony concluded. Same time tomorrow? For the asking? She laughed against his chest. Same time tomorrow. For the choosing. They left the garden hand in hand, equal partners walking into a future they'd build together. Not because fate demanded it. Not because duty required it. Because every day, they would wake up and choose each other all over again. And that choice, freely given, continuously renewed, was worth more than any claiming could ever be.
Thanks so much for watching. If you found this helpful, I'd really appreciate a like and a comment letting me know what you thought. And if you know someone who'd enjoy this, feel free to share it with them.